5 minutes until atmospheric entry, sir," reported Commander Harris, the grizzled head of Jones's security detail. His broad frame stood rigid, a walking wall of muscle and discipline. Despite his years of service, his hand hovered near his holstered sidearm as though expecting trouble. "Relax, Commander," Jones said without looking up. His tone carried a patient resolve, the voice of a man who had navigated planetary disputes and walked unarmed into war zones. "We're here as diplomats, not soldiers. Diplomacy hasn't exactly been their strong suit," muttered Lieutenant Darrell Reyes from behind Harris. The younger officer's sharp features were twisted with skepticism. "The Empire massacred 3 of our colonies and called it a misunderstanding. Now we're supposed to trust them." David finally turned, fixing Reyes with a look that froze the younger man mid-grumble. "Trust is earned. Peace is negotiated. We'll give them one last chance to prove they understand both." The ship shuddered as it pierced Gorvin's dense atmosphere. Red and orange streaks of fire rippled across the viewport, the planet's emerald-green surface swelling below. Gorvin, the seat of the Galactic Empire, was a jewel of imposing architecture and harsh beauty, a civilization that had subjugated countless races under the banners of unity and fear. Jones's jaw tightened imperceptibly. He could feel the weight of history pressing against his chest. By the time the Excalibur landed on the designated pad, flanked by towering spires of alien steel, David Jones was already descending the ramp. The wind lashed against his face, carrying the acrid scent of sulfur and industry. Behind him, Harris and Reyes followed, along with 4 more guards, their black suits armored beneath layers of diplomatic refinement. Alien soldiers ringed the landing area, their tall, sinewy bodies clad in organic-looking armor that rippled like oil on water. Their weapons, wicked plasma lances, buzzed with restrained energy. At the center of the formation stood Vothric, High Chancellor of the Empire. His elongated face bore a mask of civility, but his 4 jet-black eyes remained void of warmth. His thin lips curled in what might have been a smile, had it not been so predatory. "Ambassador Jones," Vothric said in practice standard, bowing slightly. His voice was smooth but hollow. "You honor the Empire with your presence. We regret the misunderstandings of the past. Today marks a new chapter." David extended his hand, the gesture as deliberate as it was symbolic. "Let's ensure that it does." Vothric's hesitation was brief, but it was there. He clasped Jones's hand, fingers too long and too cold, before gesturing toward the cavernous entrance of the Imperial Hall. The guards exchanged wary glances, but fell into step. The humans were outnumbered 10-1, and every alien soldier radiated quiet menace. The Imperial Hall was no less foreboding than its occupants. Enormous obsidian pillars rose like monoliths, disappearing into shadows above, while the floor's polished surface reflected their distorted figures. David walked with purpose, his boots clicking with measured rhythm, while his team fanned out cautiously behind him. Vothric led them toward an opulent dais, where alien delegates sat in silent rows, their expressions unreadable. This was no negotiation chamber. It felt more like an arena. "You must forgive our grandeur," Vothric said, his voice echoing. "The Empire cherishes ceremony." David stopped at the base of the dais. Humanity values results. Ceremony is wasted without sincerity. For a moment, silence reigned, until Vothric's upper pair of eyes narrowed slightly. Direct as ever, Ambassador Jones. He turned his head toward the gathered aliens, speaking in their harsh, guttural tongue. The sound made Rhea's hand twitch toward his weapon. "Commander," David said under his breath, his voice low but firm. "Control your men." Harris gave the faintest nod, but his gaze swept the room, cataloging every exit and threat. Reyes exhaled sharply, though his fingers remained inches from his holster. Vothric's speech ended, and the assembled aliens thumped their hands against their chests, a rhythm that grew louder, tribal, ominous. It was a warning wrapped in ritual. Jones held his ground. The Chancellor turned back, his expression unreadable. "Tell me, Ambassador, how does humanity punish betrayal?" David tilted his head, his voice even. "I assume you already know, but we're not here to punish anyone, Chancellor. Humanity seeks peace. If your actions match your words, we can put the past behind us." The Chancellor's lip curled, his mockery bleeding through his facade. "And if our actions do not?" The first scream came from behind. David spun just in time to see one of his guards thrown across the chamber, his body crumpling lifeless against a pillar. Plasma lances ignited with an electric wail, and chaos erupted. Harris drew his pistol, taking down 2 aliens before their lances tore through his chest in a blaze of energy. Reyes fired wildly, his face twisted in fury, as the aliens closed in like wolves. "Enough!" David shouted, his voice carrying over the melee. "Stop this. We came here under your word." A plasma lance struck Reyes in the back, cutting him off mid-scream. David staggered, his mind reeling as his team fell one by one. 2 alien guards seized him, their grip like iron, dragging him forward. Blood streaked the obsidian floor behind him. Vothric descended the dais with measured grace, stopping inches from David's face. The human's eyes burned with fury, but his voice remained steady. "This is how the Empire treats peace envoys." Vothric's thin smile returned, colder this time. "There is no peace to be made with vermin." The Chancellor gestured, and a black bag was pulled roughly over David Jones's head. His muffled shout echoed through the chamber before silence consumed him. The alien delegates rose in unison, their thumping rhythm returning like the beat of some ancient war drum. The Galactic Empire had just made its choice. The black screen flickered to life across the galaxy, first in homes, then on public squares, military stations, and everywhere else the Empire's signal could touch. Humanity's worlds were no exception. On Earth, vast crowds gathered beneath massive holographic projectors that loomed over cities like silent titans, their screens glowing an ominous shade of blue. Broadcast towers on Luna and Mars crackled with signals relayed across the solar system, carrying a message humanity had not asked to hear. It began without prelude. Ambassador David Jones stood at the center of a grand alien amphitheater, his posture straight despite the iron restraints pinning his arms behind him. Floodlights bathed him in a cold, sterile glow, casting harsh shadows across his face, now bruised and bloodied. His once pristine suit was torn at the sleeve, its fabric stained with a smear of dark red. Around him, the stadium buzzed with a chorus of alien voices, a deep, guttural murmur that rippled with anticipation. Above, rows of black-eyed spectators stared down at him with predatory calm. In the center, framed by a throne of jagged black metal, sat Chancellor Vothric. His elongated form was poised with cruel authority, his eyes reflecting the arena lights like pools of tar. He leaned forward as though savoring the moment, his thin lips parting. "People of the galaxy, behold the face of humanity." Vothric's voice echoed through the arena and across the broadcast, amplified by unseen technology. "Ambassador David Jones, Earth's chosen envoy, came to us promising peace. But what is peace from a race of mongrels and murderers? A race that claws at the stars like vermin." David's eyes rose slowly, locking onto Vothric. Though restrained and battered, there was no surrender in his gaze, only a quiet, smoldering fury. The cameras panned close to capture it, and on every human world, people saw that stare, a challenge that spoke to something primal, something unyielding. On Earth, a mother in a crowded square gripped her son's hand tightly as tears traced her cheeks. In a barracks on Mars, soldiers gathered silently, their fists clenching as Vothric's words grated through the speakers. In orbit around Titan, the crew of a fleet carrier abandoned their duties to watch, the silence on their deck broken only by the low hum of the broadcast. "This man," Vothric continued, gesturing with a sweeping hand, "represents all of humanity's arrogance. They dared to land on our soil. They dared to demand our respect. And when their primitive cries for peace fell upon our ears, we knew the truth. These creatures cannot coexist. They are dangerous, and they must be broken. David spoke then, his voice carrying just enough to cut through Vothrik's words. "You're wrong." The murmur fell to silence. Even Vothrik paused, his 4 eyes narrowing with interest. David lifted his head further, ignoring the trickle of blood trailing down from his temple. "You think this display will break us? You think killing me makes you strong?" He scanned the crowd, his voice steady. "But you've misunderstood humanity. We don't break. We don't bow." The Chancellor's face twitched with irritation, but the crowd began to hiss and snarl, their alien voices turning hostile. With a flick of Vothrik's wrist, 2 guards stepped forward, their plasma pikes humming with lethal energy. One struck David across the side, the blow forcing him to his knees as blue sparks arced through the air. On Earth, someone in the crowd screamed. On Mars, a soldier punched a wall so hard his knuckles bled. Vothrik stood slowly, his silhouette stretching monstrous beneath the lights. "Enough! Let the galaxy see what becomes of those who defy the Empire." The guard seized David by the arms and dragged him to the execution platform, a dais of black stone that jutted upward like an altar to some forgotten god. From every angle, cameras swarmed, broadcasting every painful inch of his forced ascent. Humanity watched as their envoy, their voice of peace, was shackled upright, his head forced down into a humiliating bow. Vothrik approached the platform, his voice once more carrying across the galaxy. "This is our mercy. Let this death be a warning, and perhaps one day your kind will remember its place." David lifted his head one last time, and he looked straight into the main camera lens. His voice cut through the noise, hoarse but unshaken. "Humanity will remember." Vothrik gestured, and the guards plunged their plasma lances into David Jones's chest. The beams burned through fabric, flesh, and bone with a sickening hiss. His body jerked once, his mouth opening in a final, silent gasp before the lights in his eyes went out. The camera lingered cruelly, holding his still frame for a heartbeat too long. The broadcast ended. On Earth, silence hung heavy in the air as crowds stood frozen, faces pale and jaws slack. Then, like a storm breaking over an ocean, the silence erupted. People screamed in grief and rage. In military bunkers and fleet command centers, hands slammed onto desks as curses filled the air. A captain on Mars turned to his crew, his voice tight with controlled fury. "Prepare the fleet for launch. Now." At Earth's Central Command, President Elias Gray sat motionless before the darkened screen, his hand trembling slightly where it rested on the desk. Advisors murmured behind him, their voices drowned in white noise. Finally, he rose. His expression was as hard and unyielding as stone. "Get me General Thorne." The blackness of space lay still, a vast emptiness haunted by distant stars. But on the edge of the Gorvan system, it was no longer silent. Humanity had come. A fleet of warships, dark as the void, surged forward in tight formations. The UN Retribution, Earth's largest and most feared dreadnought, led the armada. It was a Leviathan forged in steel and fire, its hull lined with rows of planet-cracking cannons and weapon arrays that glowed faintly in preparation. Surrounding it, cruisers and destroyers prowled like wolves in orbit, their engines humming with a sound that could almost be mistaken for anger. General Alexander Thorne stood on the bridge of the Retribution. Tall and broad-shouldered, with streaks of gray cutting through his dark hair, Thorne radiated an unshakable authority. His face was carved from years of war, and his eyes held the cold focus of a man prepared to do the unthinkable. "Status?" he asked, his voice rumbling through the steel-clad chamber. "Final fleet checks complete," responded Captain Ford, a sharp-featured officer who stood at Thorne's right hand. "Weapons primed. Planet killer payload is online and ready for delivery." Thorne's gaze shifted to the central holodisplay. Gorvan loomed there, green, proud, and undefended. The Empire's arrogance had made them slow. They didn't believe humanity could strike back. Not like this. Not so soon. They wanted a demonstration, Thorne muttered, almost to himself. They're going to get one. Behind him, the bridge crew worked in silence, fingers moving across glowing consoles. Every man and woman aboard the fleet had seen the broadcast of David Jones's death. They carried it with them, a fire buried beneath cold professionalism. No orders had been necessary to remind them why they were here. Message from the UN Vindicator. A comms officer reported. Admiral Black confirms all ships in position. Thorne nodded, his expression unchanged. Open a channel to the fleet. The comms officer's fingers tapped rapidly, and a soft beep signaled success. Thorne stepped forward, clasping his hands behind his back as he addressed every soldier aboard every ship in the Armada. This is General Thorne. His voice was calm, heavy with purpose. Today, we carry the weight of David Jones, of his sacrifice, and the countless lives the Empire has stolen from us. They sought to humiliate us, to make an example of our envoy. But all they have done is remind us of who we are. Silence hung for a moment, thick as storm clouds. We are humanity, Thorne continued. We don't bow. We don't break. And when you come for us, we bring hell. Across the fleet, cheers erupted like thunder. War cries swallowed by the void. On the Retribution, Captain Ford turned to Thorne, his voice low. Your orders, sir? Thorne's eyes burned as they fixed on the hollow image of Gorvin. Begin the assault. The void of space came alive with fire. From the dreadnought's massive cannon ports, beams of searing white light lanced through the dark, trailing devastation in their wake. Smaller cruisers and destroyers fired their own salvos, arcs of plasma and missile trails streaking toward the planet's surface. Within moments, the green glow of Gorvin's atmosphere began to churn and darken as the bombardment rained down. On the planet, panic spread like wildfire. Cities that had stood for millennia, monuments to the Empire's supposed invincibility, shattered in violent cascades of debris and flame. Towers collapsed as shockwaves rippled across their foundations, and entire districts vanished into plumes of smoke. The sky turned a sickly shade of gray as clouds of ash rose to blot out the sun. In the Retribution's targeting center, Commander Vaughn, a sharp-eyed strategist, relayed precision strikes to the fleet. Target their planetary defense grid. We'll leave them blind before they realize it. Shields are collapsing across all major cities, Ford reported, a note of grim satisfaction in his voice. No resistance yet. Of course not, Thorne replied, his gaze unflinching. They don't know how to fight someone who refuses to kneel. Suddenly, alarms wailed across the bridge as a new alert flashed onto the holoscreen. Admiral Black's forces are detecting Empire warships entering the system, Ford said, voice clipped. 50 signatures and climbing. Thorne's lips curled into a faint smile, the expression devoid of humor. Let them come. The holo display adjusted, showing alien warships streaming out of Gorvin's shadow. The Empire's fleet was elegant and serpentine, their vessels sloping and curved, their engines leaving trails of pale energy. As they sped toward humanity's armada, plasma lances and energy bolts lit the void. The first volley struck the UN Vindicator's shields, rippling harmlessly across its surface. Earth's fleet returned fire in a synchronized barrage, tearing through the Empire's front ranks. 2 alien ships broke apart immediately, their remains spiraling into Gorvin's orbit like falling embers. On the bridge of the Retribution, the crew worked like a single organism. Orders were shouted, systems adjusted, targets locked. Humanity's fleet pushed forward, undeterred by the Empire's counterattack. General, said Vaughn, his voice tight, planet killer payload is within deployment range. Your call. Thorne stepped toward the viewport, where the fires of Gorvin glowed faintly against the black. For a moment, he said nothing. The silence stretched, heavy with finality. Deploy it, he said. A deep vibration thrummed through the Retribution's hull as the massive payload was released. A dark, metallic projectile, hundreds of meters long, drifted for an instant before its engines roared to life, propelling it toward the planet. From orbit, the descent was breathtaking, if terrifying. The payload entered Gorvin's atmosphere, a black dagger trailing a tail of fire. It struck the planet's surface in a flash that swallowed everything. The explosion was not immediate. There was a pause, like the world itself gasped. Then, from the epicenter, a column of white light burst upward, piercing the heavens. Shockwaves spread across the surface, flattening mountains and boiling oceans. Cities, forests, and plains were obliterated in an expanding ring of devastation. Within moments, Gorvin, once the pride of the galactic empire, was reduced to a smoldering ruin. The bridge crew stared in silence as data streamed in. Ford swallowed hard. Planetary surface completely decimated, sir. Thorne exhaled slowly, his gaze fixed on the dying world. They brought this on themselves. Vaughn turned, his voice hesitant. General, enemy fleet is retreating. They've lost heart. Let them go, Thorne said quietly. They'll spread the word. On every human world, the images spread just as quickly. People watched as the Empire's jewel burned. A people once mocked as weak and fractured had just delivered a death blow to their greatest enemy. Across colonies and stations, humanity erupted into shouts of triumph, tears streaming, fists raised. In his quiet, steel-lined quarters, Thorne sat alone, staring at a small hollow photo of David Jones. The ambassador's calm, confident face stared back. Rest easy, Thorne murmured. They'll never forget you. The ashes of Gorvin hung in the void, a spreading cloud of black and gray that marked where a planet had once thrived. Fleets of warships, human and alien alike, now drifted at a distance, as if afraid to approach the grave they had witnessed being carved into the galaxy. Amid the silence, messages spread faster than light, carried on whispers, broadcasts, and the fearful gasps of survivors who escaped the destruction. Humanity had spoken. From his command chair aboard the UN Retribution, General Alexander Thorne stared at the hollow display. It showed what remained of Gorvin. No surface, no cities, no life. Just ruin. The shockwaves from the blast had already passed, but the scars they left behind would echo for centuries. General, Captain Ford said, his voice softer than usual, our fleets have confirmed all remaining enemy forces are in retreat. The system is ours. Thorne didn't react immediately. His hands gripped the arms of his chair, his expression carved from stone. Losses? Ford checked the data on his console. Minimal, sir. They weren't prepared for us. And their people? Gorvin's planetary population eliminated, Ford said quietly. The words hung in the air. The bridge crew, though they worked with their usual efficiency, spoke in hushed tones, as if the weight of what they had done pressed down on every console and panel. Thorne rose from his chair and walked to the viewport, where the ruins of Gorvin were still faintly visible. His reflection stared back at him. A man who had unleashed hell to send a message. Open a channel, he ordered. Ford hesitated. To whom, sir? To everyone. The comms officer's hands moved quickly, keying in commands that activated humanity's deep space transmitters. Within moments, Thorne's voice and image would reach every human colony, every empire system, and every neutral world in between. This was not a moment for silence. The hollow cameras flickered to life, and Thorne turned to face them. His tall figure filled the frame, and his dark eyes burned with a steady, measured intensity. Behind him, the stars gleamed faintly against the void, distant witnesses to the carnage. This is General Alexander Thorne, speaking on behalf of the United Earth Navy and the people of humanity. He paused, allowing the silence to carry the weight of the moment. 2 days ago, the Galactic Empire committed an act of atrocity. They lured our ambassador, David Jones, to their world under the pretense of peace. They murdered his guards, paraded him before the galaxy, and executed him in cold blood. They called us vermin. They called us weak. Thorne's gaze sharpened, the fire in his voice rising. But humanity does not forget. Humanity does not forgive. Images of David Jones's execution were already circulating across the galaxy, spliced together now with footage of the Empire's ship shattered in space and the fireball that had consumed Gorvin. Every image reinforced the truth. Humanity was not to be crossed. Today we struck back, Thorn continued, not for conquest, not for glory, but to remind the Empire of what happens when they believe they can humiliate us without consequence. Gorvin has paid the price for their arrogance. He stepped closer to the camera, his voice lowering, though it carried the force of a storm. Let this be a warning to every power in the galaxy. We came in peace, and you spat on our hand. If you harm one of us, you will answer to all of us. If you come for our people, we will burn your worlds to cinders. Across human colonies, people erupted into cheers, throats raw with vindication, hearts pounding with pride. Soldiers in barracks stood taller. Families grieving their lost sons and daughters felt the heat of justice rekindled in their chests. On Earth, crowds filled cities with chants that shook the streets. Humanity had been mocked for centuries as fractured, chaotic, and small. But in this moment, they were united in their fury, and the stars themselves trembled at the sound. Thorn's voice softened as he finished. To the Galactic Empire, consider this mercy. This ends here. Leave us in peace, or you will face our wrath again. And next time, there will be no mercy. The transmission cut out. On the bridge, silence settled once more. Thorn turned from the viewport and returned to his chair, his movements slow and deliberate. Captain Ford exhaled, breaking the quiet. It's done. For now, Thorn replied, rubbing his knuckles thoughtfully against the armrest. He looked at Ford, his gaze distant. Do you think they understand? Ford hesitated, then nodded. If they don't now, they will soon. Thorn said nothing more. He sat still as the retribution drifted through the aftermath of the war it had begun. Outside, the black veil of space stretched on endlessly, unmarred by the fires they had lit. Somewhere, on distant worlds, alien leaders would be watching, shaking, as they considered humanity's message. Somewhere else, people would curse the name of Alexander Thorn. Thorn knew this would not be the end. It never was. Violence always bore seeds for more violence. He knew that new battles would follow, fierce, bloody wars born of vengeance and fear. Perhaps he had only delayed the inevitable. Perhaps humanity had just painted a target on its back the size of a star. But none of that mattered now. He reached into his uniform pocket and pulled out a small hollow projector. The image of David Jones flickered into existence above his palm, the ambassador frozen in time with that quiet, confident smile. For the first time since Gorvin's fall, Thorn's mask of steel faltered, if only slightly. You didn't deserve that, he murmured, his voice low. But they'll never forget your name. I promise you that. The hollow image faded, leaving Thorn alone with the hum of the ship. He sat back, the fires of Gorvin still lingering behind his eyes. Elsewhere in the galaxy, the news spread like wildfire. Some civilizations condemned humanity for the destruction. Others applauded it, secretly hoping to align themselves with Earth's rising power. The Galactic Empire, for all its strength, had been dealt a wound they could not hide. Their enemies whispered that humanity had done what no other species dared to dream. And in every corner of the void, the stars whispered a name carried on humanity's fury, Gorvin. It was not the end, but it was enough. For now, days after the destruction of Gorvin, the galaxy remained silent, stunned, fearful, and waiting. No new proclamations came from the Galactic Empire, no messages of vengeance or defiance. For now, they stewed in their humiliation, their power suddenly not so absolute. On the bridge of the UN Retribution, the stars stretched endlessly, untouched by war. Thorn sat alone in his quarters, the faint hum of the ship his only company. The hollow image of David Jones still rested in his hand, flickering softly. Jones's death had been a match, but Thorn had been the spark that lit the inferno. A chime interrupted his thoughts. "General, incoming transmission," came Ford's voice through the intercom. "From whom?" Thorne asked. There was a pause. "It's unidentified." "It's strange, sir." A new voice, one we haven't heard before. Thorne's brow furrowed. He stood, walking to the console. "Patch it through." The display flared to life, static rippling across the screen. A faint, distorted voice spoke, calm, measured, and alien. "We have seen what you are capable of, humanity, and we are watching." The screen went black. Thorne stood still, his expression unreadable, but a shadow passed across his face. Somewhere, out in the endless dark, new eyes were turning toward Earth, eyes that had not been there before. He turned off the display and whispered to himself, "It's only begun." And beyond the stars, the void waited.